Bonnie Prince Charlie and the Battle of Culloden. This is Charles, Edward, Louis, John, Casimir, Sylvester, Severino, Maria Stewart. And because this is read along as a nickname, some folks called him the Young Pretender, or as he's still known today, Bonnie Prince Charlie. But to be able to understand his story, let's have a quick look back in time. The Stuarts had been kings and queens of Scotland since 1371. During the Glorreiche Revolu-tion, James VII of Scotland, a Catholic, was replaced by his Protestant daughter Mary and her husband William of Orange. James then fled to France. The supporters of James were called Jacobites, after the Latin name for James, Jacobus, and this was not their only try to make the Stuarts great again. The Jacobite Rising of 1715 consisted of 12,000 armed men in Britain. It was led by John Erskine, but instead of taking the big chance, he hesitated and hesitated and hesitated. The local support for the Rising melted away. France didn't want to take part at all, and even the draw in the Battle of Sheriff-Muir couldn't change this. James Francis, the son of James VII, arrived far too late and instantly had to sail back to France. James Francis, the Old Pretender, meanwhile living in a palace in Rome, wasn't happy at all. Even he had married Maria Klementyna Sobieska, a beautiful Polish princess. But on New Year's Eve in 1720, the young pretender Charles Edward finally sees the light of day. His birth is announced to Jacobites in secret code as a new Christmas carol. O come all ye faithful, joyful and triumphant. O come ye to Bethlehem. Come and behold him, born the King of Angels. Do you get it? Charles is a noisy child and grows to become a troublesome teenager. But he soon speaks various languages as Polish, Latin, Italian, French, Gaelic and English. But how could this noisy little lad lead a rising in the country he has never been to before? Well, in 1740 the Austrian War of Succession starts. Frederick the Great of Prussia is backed by France and Spain, both old allies of Scotland. But Austria and Hungary is backed by the Hanoverian monarchy of England. In Scotland the people only get, France is once again ready to fight England, even if in fact there has never been a declaration of war. Asked for help by the French, James Francis, who has become a too old pretender, decides to make Charles Edward Prince Regent in 1743. In February 1744, Charles Edward set sail for Scotland with French ships and troops, but as many ships sink in the stormy water, Charles is forced to return to France. But after he has backed and borrowed enough French money, Charles risks a second attempt and once again sets sail with two armed and equipped ships. With one ship being destroyed by English forces, Charles finally reaches the Scottish Isle of Eriskay in the Hebrides, with only 7 remaining supporters. He meets with the clan chief Alexander of Boisdale, who tells him to go home. But Charles famously replies, "I am come home, sir." On the 19th of August in 1745, the rebellion is launched, with Charles raising the Jacobite standard at Glen-finnan. Today, a quite nice monument reminds of this historical and symbolic act. No one really knows what Charles said to convince the clans of supporting the rising, but with a background of famine and poverty, he may have promised they could get it all back, whatever it was. The plan to abolish the Union of 1707 between England and Scotland, and promises that he would be accompanied by thousands of French soldiers, ships and money may have convinced the people as well. Amongst the troops banding together under Charles are many Highlanders of different clans, but they are also men from the east coast of Scotland, red-coated Irish PKs from the French army, a regiment of English Jacobites and many others. But as Charlie imagines a kind of uniform for his men, they are all dressed in tartan, made from materials immediately to hand on their march and mostly having nothing in common with the identifiable patterns of the old clans. Charles and his Jacobite army now march on Edinburgh, first passing Perth and enter Edinburgh unopposed, although the castle itself remains in government hands. 4 days later, the Jacobites scattered the government army in command of Sir John Cope in the Battle of Prestonpans, just outside today's Scottish capital. The Jacobites now have Scotland. The old pretender is proclaimed King of Scotland and the young pretender his regent. Leading Jacobites, amongst them Charles's most important commander, Lord George Murray, now tell him to wait in Edinburgh and to call upon the French. But Charles wants to march towards London to make his victory complete. In a poll of his inner circle, he uses all his power of persuasion, and so the decision is made by one single vote. They will march on London. The Jacobites cross the English border, and being convinced French help would come, they reach and capture Carlisle, Preston, Manchester and finally Derby, only 130 miles from London. But they run short of food, weapons and money. As there is still no prospect of French help, and with 2 government armies marching onto them, they decide to withdraw back to Scotland. On urge of Murray, and against resistance of Charles, they back down first to Glasgow, then to Inverness in the Highlands. Prince William Augustus, Duke of Cumberland, is a tall man, battle-trained and scarred, popular with his men and brutal in the face of his enemies. Cumberland returns from a campaign in Flanders with a government army. In the Battle of Culloden, about 6,500 foot soldiers and 2,500 dragoons fight under his command. The number of Scots fighting for Cumberland is actually bigger than the number of Scots fighting for Charles. On the 15th of April in 1746, government army celebrates Cumberland's birthday in Nairn. At Murray's suggestion, the Jacobites try a night attack on the enemy. They start at the set of dusk and march across the country to avoid government outposts. But for this reason they are very slow, and when they finally arrive only 2 miles from the enemy, the day is yet to break. After a heated discussion, the Jacobites decide not to take the risk of an attack, but to march back all the way. Back in their camp at Culloden Muir, the troops are spread in search of food or simply fallen asleep. They are exhausted, tired and hungry. But when Charles hears about the government army marching on him, he takes over the command and makes a decision. Against all advice, Charles orders his men to line up on Culloden Muir and finally face the enemy. On this day, the 16th of April, the Battle of Culloden takes place. It will last only about 25 minutes. The 2 armies are in sight of each other. The commanders lead their units in personnel, but Charles watches from behind, escorted and safe. The Jacobites' front row start to find their way. Murray and Lord John Drummond lead their units towards the enemy, and caused by the Moor's topography find themselves in a kind of funnel effect. Concentrated like this, they first cause important losses within the government army. But the left wing under James Drummond is left alone on open ground, a clear fire line for the government's cannons and musketry. They are quashed. With this, the Jacobite army starts to collapse. Government dragoons manage to break through the stone walls, protecting the right flanks of the Jacobite army that is now being attacked from almost every direction. Charles is brought away. His army is scattered. The battle is lost. About 2,000 Jacobites are killed or wounded this day, some 300 government soldiers. The ones not imprisoned have to stand trial for high treason. Many are commuted to penal transportation to the British colonies for life. In the aftermath, Cumberland and his men have no mercy. They march through the Highlands, burning, killing, and pillaging. New laws are enacted to further integrate Scotland, especially the Highlands. Charles Edward Stuart flees, and disguised as Betty Burke, the maid of a woman called Flora MacDonald, he finally makes it to the Isle of Skye. He sets sail to France in secret and finally arrives in Italy, leaving all the men who fought for the Jacobite cause to their destiny. For the rest of his life, Charles fails in trying to convince European rulers to help him get on the Scottish throne. He grows a long red beard and gets more and more addicted to alcohol. On the 30th of January in 1788, he dies in the same palace in Rome he was once born in. The 45 was not about Catholics against Protestants, and it was much less about the Scottish against the English. It was a bunch of people fighting the government, disappointed by the promises of the Union, exhausted by poor harvests and famine, and perhaps longing for the older, the better times of Scotland. And they were led not by a great warrior, but by a romantic dreamer with a lack of sense for reality, who was convinced that it's his destiny to become King of Scotland. What remains today is the remembrance of the last battle ever fought on British soil, and the men who gave their life for a case which was doomed to failure from the very beginning. To say it in the words of Scottish poet William Collins, "How sleep the brave who sink to rest, by all their country's wishes blessed."